Good morning, everyone. I'm Christy Ellenberg. I'm the Director of Collaborative Partnerships and Strategic Initiatives for DHEC's Environmental Affairs. It's a pleasure to be with you today. Both today and Thursday, I'm going to be serving in the role of your facilitator. And this is really a series of some very important stakeholder meetings that we are going to be having regarding some possible updates to Regulation 61-9 for land application and final use of sludge and effluent. So these conversations are so meaningful to our DHEC Environmental Affairs and Bureau of Water teams. We've invited each of you as representatives of diverse stakeholder groups that bring in some different perspectives. And, recently we ended a notice of drafting comment period. So we also made sure we extended invitations to those who commented. And we've shared those documents as a resource to everyone involved. So we do want to hear from you today. We want this to be a participatory virtual meeting. We appreciate everybody working with us as we kind of made this a virtual meeting, recognizing that the COVID numbers were going back up. And I'm really thankful we did that because I have a teenager upstairs who is quarantining with some and isolating with some COVID right now. But we did plan this to be able to have people be able to join in. And we wanted this to be 2 meetings, recognizing there may be a lot to digest and give some more time for everybody to kind of think through things so that we can continue our conversation later this week as well. So during these meetings, I want to encourage you, if you have something that you want to use, that you want to drop in the chat, you can use the chat to reach out to people. You can raise your hand. If you're calling in by phone, you can use *6 to unmute. You may see me kind of move some people to the attendee status. That kind of helps me be able to monitor who's trying to speak and raise their hand a little bit better as your facilitator. And I may mute someone if there is some background noise that we're just trying to manage so that everybody can hear a little bit better. Also, I wanted to make sure everyone's aware we're recording this really as a reference for us because this is such an important and timely conversation and process. So first, I want to make sure we start off with some brief introductions of those who are joining us, and then we'll turn things over to Myra Reese, our Director of Environmental Affairs, and to Crystal Rippey with the Bureau of Water. And Crystal will be doing a lot of our presenting today. So I'm trying to keep up as people have been joining in this meeting. I know we have some who have joined us kind of representing our industry and business consultants groups, and maybe some affiliated organizations. I'm going to see if we can get y'all to introduce yourselves. Again, I'm kind of trying to scan as people are joining. I think Ruth Albright is here. Ruth, you want to introduce yourself briefly and just your affiliation?
Yes, I'm here representing the State Chamber. Many of you know me. I chair the Water Subcommittee for the State Chamber Environmental Affairs Committee.
Okay. And then I see Rebecca Leach from SCMA. You want to introduce yourself?
Hey, yes, good morning. Rebecca Leach with the South Carolina Manufacturers Alliance, and I oversee the government affairs for SCMA.
Okay. I know we have a few people who were joining us this morning from Denali. David, I believe you provided some comments to us. Do you want to kind of say hello and introduce your team? It's also a good little facilitator mic check. So, David Coyle from Denali. Or if there's someone else from Denali who has joined.
Hello, this is Lauren Miller with Denali.
Hey, thank you, Lauren.
I'm sorry about that.
No. Like I said, this is a good, in addition to letting everybody know who's joined us, it's a good way to make sure we see how people can participate as well. So I appreciate your help, Lauren.
I'm Eric Skinner with Denali.
Okay, thank you, Eric. Good to know. Trying to see, and again, we have someone who's joined by phone, so I don't want to leave anybody out. Are there other people who are kind of from business and industry or that consulting side? I think we had a few more that registered.
We're also from Denali.
Right, don't let me leave anyone out. We also have a number of people who are joining us from some of our environmental advocacy and nonprofit groups. Carl, do you want to start us off?
Hey,
Okay,
sorry, I'm getting some strange feedback here. But this is Carl Berzerad. I'm a senior associate attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center in Charleston.
Thank you, Carl. Emily, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, my name is Emily Weich, and I'm a staff attorney at SCLC in the Charleston office as well.
Thanks, Emily, for being here. I see we have Megan Chase from Upstate Forever. Megan?
Hey y'all, I'm Megan Chase. I'm the State Policy Director at Upstate Forever. Thanks for having this.
Okay, let's see. Who else do we have? And I appreciate y'all bearing with me as I kind of scroll through these. Riley, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, howdy y'all. My name is Riley Egger, and I'm the Land, Water, and Wildlife Project Manager with the Coastal Conservation League.
Are there some others from our environmentalist organizations? Make sure we get those introductions done. We also have people from our agribusiness sectors that are part of today's call. I believe I saw Paul Breadwell. Paul, would you like to introduce yourself? There's that feedback again, yeah. Okay. I'm thinking Paul may be the one that's having some trouble. Paul, if you're able to use the chat. Paul is from the U.S. Poultry and Egg Federation or Association. I'm sorry. So, Paul, we're going to work with you to make sure we get your comments into things as well. Do we have others that have joined us from the agribusiness sector?
Belger Farms.
Wayne Belger, thank you for joining us. I see you've maybe joined by phone. Okay. And then we also have kind of our municipalities and water utilities that have joined in. Christy Everett, would you like to start off?
Yeah, sure. This is Christy Everett. I'm with Grand Strand Water and Sewer Authority, and we're a water and sewer provider in the northeastern region of South Carolina.
Okay. And then I believe from REWA, we have Angie Price.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Angie Price. I'm from Renewable Water Resources, and we're a regional sewer provider in the upstate of South Carolina.
Thanks for being here, Angie. Okay, I feel like I've missed some people. Y'all may have to help me. Paul Calamita.
Sure. Paul Calamita. I'm General Counsel to the South Carolina Water Quality Association. We're a statewide group of public water, sewer, and stormwater utilities. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Paul. And are there some others that we haven't introduced yet who want to make sure they introduce themselves?
Yes. My name's Will Hodges. I'm with Denali Water.
Thanks, Will. So I think as everybody can see, we do have representatives from agriculture, from our municipalities and water utilities, from our environmental organizations, and from the related business and industry and associations and consultants that are there. So we appreciate everybody coming together today. The people who haven't been introduced yet are our DHEC team. I'm going to turn things over in just a moment to Myra Reese, I do want to make sure we kind of share. We have a number of people from Bureau of Water. Jennifer Hughes is our Bureau Chief, and I think she's sharing a laptop right now. So, Jennifer, you want to say hello?
Good morning. I'm Jennifer Hughes, the Chief of the Bureau of Water. We do have a conference room, and several of the team members are gathered in here. We are waiting for our camera to be set up. It's been ordered kind of thing. So we're going to pass a laptop and hope the sound comes through good. But physically in the room with us, Crystal's going to be doing a lot of the presentation today, so y'all be hearing from her. We also have Joe Kuhn and Sean Clark and Brenda Green, Sandra Snyder, Rob Devlin, Fran Marshall, and Myra. So we are the DHEC team members that are actually in a conference room here and be able to interact and hopefully have good conversations with y'all today. And then we also have some of our team members on the phone, like Drew Edwards and Tyra Folk is also out there, and Jocelyn Walters Brandon's out there. So we have a whole DHEC team available, and we're really looking forward to the next 2 meetings, today's and Thursday's meeting, to have a really good conversation and input from you, our stakeholders. So, hey, we having to do it virtual, but I'm glad we're able to do it this way today and have this important conversation. So thank y'all for participating.
Thanks, Jennifer. And it also looks like joining us now from Grand Strand Water and Sewer is Tim Brown. Tim, would you like to say hello?
Hey, everyone.
With that, I know this is such an important topic. I want to make sure we get to our discussion. So I'm going to pass things over to Myra Reese, our Director of Environmental Affairs, and you'll hear me kind of pop back up to help on a facilitation side. So again, if you have some questions or comments that you want to throw in the chat, I'll be watching that and also watching for hands that are raised as Myra and Crystal share information.
All right. Thank you, Christy. Good morning, everybody. Just wanted to make a few comments, and like Jennifer, we appreciate all of you spending some time with us this week, and we do really wish that we could do this in person, and we look forward to seeing you in person very soon and continuing this very important dialogue. And so I wanted to hopefully try to set the stage for the conversation, you know, and I was thinking about just the process that we use when we have very important decisions to make as an agency that have such a huge impact on the state as a whole. It's so important to have diversity. I think the strength of decisions that agencies can make really relies on input from a diverse group of stakeholders to make sure that we have a good understanding of the different perspectives and you know, the different stakeholders who will be impacted and have a vested interest in the decisions that we make, which ultimately impact the communities across the state. Your participation is going to be critical for us to be successful. So, and I really hope that we can have a very open, very transparent conversation. You know, we may have some conversations that we're going to have different opinions and just agree to disagree. And I think that's what sets South Carolina apart when I talk to other states across the country, that we're able to have that collaborative spirit, you know, roll up our sleeves and deal with these very difficult issues and very complex and challenging issues, and put our thinking caps on and have those conversations. I was reminded recently, I mentioned this to Jennifer, that I was involved with the Clean Power Plan and air regulation a few years ago, and I know several of the stakeholders on this call were part of that. I think that process was a model not only for South Carolina, but for the state as a whole, is that we really felt comfortable. And I think just hearing the participants that are on this call, we routinely get together and have conversations And that's what we really need to be able to move forward and talk about this issue. There's so many moving pieces, as y'all know, to PFAS. And certainly as a state, I think all states across the country are really struggling with trying to identify the priorities and things they want to work on, things they feel like are best suited for EPA, how EPA can assist the states. I was in DC last week and we had some really, really good conversations, and quite frankly, land application of biosolids was one of the top priorities that EPA is asking for assistance from the states, and states are asking for assistance from EPA. So that shows you that, you know, what we're focused on is right in line with what states are struggling, and the questions, you know, all the uncertainty that we have, just trying to make some decisions on what we could be doing from a state perspective and what we need, the conversations we need to be having, that kind of thing. So no doubt that this is a multimedia issue, and it was very interesting sitting in the conference room with the AAs from all the different program areas with EPA. And I know this is something we try to strive for within DHEC, our state organization, is anytime we have a very complex issue, I have all the bureau chiefs sitting around the table. It may be primarily a water issue, but Henry, Rhonda, Renee, all of the leadership of the different program areas are engaged in looking at the big picture, looking at the holistic view of decisions, how they impact all the program areas, and how they impact from a policy standpoint. So it was really interesting that we were having those conversations. So I did want to make sure that you knew from a national perspective, and some of these specific areas that Crystal may be pointing out. I know she's been mentioning some things to me that would be very helpful if EPA could kind of crank up the volume and jump on some of these things sooner than later. I'm going to be pushing that from a national perspective, and we're going to be starting to have some very frequent conversations with EPA and try to prioritize some things that will be helpful for us as we continue to have conversations in South Carolina. As a reminder, you know, I know that all of you are aware of this, but just kind of how we got to this point. You know, we're always interested in what the General Assembly and our state leaders say about the environmental issues, and they certainly have spoken when it comes to PFAS, the whole issue. Not only how complex it is, and you may remember that initially some of the messages and the interest over at the State House were coming from the idea of setting an MCL, very similar to what other states were doing across the country. And very soon after we started having those conversations, and I know many of you were engaged with some of the state leaders with, you know, the process of setting MCLs at the federal level, and whether it, you know, it was conducive for South Carolina to move in that direction and what resources would be needed, that it transitioned to state leaders understanding the need for South Carolina to have some data. So we would have a better understanding of the prevalence of PFAS in South Carolina. Every state, you know, with their testing strategies, were coming up with, you know, a different picture of what they were dealing with, and that data would help us have a better understanding of the fate and transport of PFAS in South Carolina. And so we have always said that the data and the science will drive or inform the need for legislation and regulation for emerging issues and contaminants in South Carolina, and the need for resources. And I do want to say that, like I said, not only many of you have been very supportive of our testing strategies, and because of your support, the legislature actually provided $10 million to help us finish our strategy. And also, I think they highlighted the concern about the practice of land application of biosolids and the impacts to private wells. And so those, to me, are messages from our state leaders, some of their focus. And I just want to thank all of you who were involved in those conversations. And at the end of the day, you know, for us to tackle these emerging issues, we need those resources along with having, you know, good, strong partnerships with all of you. And we also have the day-to-day jobs of our core mission program areas that we need to keep up with. So thank you for being engaged with this issue to this point, and our continued focus and priority. I also, I think many of you, I think some materials were sent out as far as the comments already, which Crystal's going to touch on those. But also to SCELP, you know, I think many of you were aware of their petition for rulemaking that we received, and I think there were maybe 4 or 5 different areas that we're focused on right now, and in particular, one of the items included in the petition for rulemaking was industrial application of biosolids. So that kind of gives you a summary of the many stakeholders and critical leaders in South Carolina who are focused on this issue, and kind of what brought us where we are today. I do want to say that we're moving forward this summer with our testing strategy, looking at ambient surface water, fish, crab. We're looking at smaller water systems. And, you know, I asked Rob Devlin earlier today, you know, what we have learned already about PFAS and biosolids just based on different investigations and different data that we have. And I'm sure we'll have an opportunity to have some of that conversation after Crystal lays out some things for you. So we're going to be talking about this, getting a lot of input. We really value this group especially because we've worked with so many of you on a daily basis and as a coalition. And I just, please, I think the most important that we can do from a state agency standpoint is listen. And for this to, for us to make the best decision that we can for the state of South Carolina, we really need you guys engaged in participating and speaking up and sharing your perspectives. And so with that, I will turn it back over to you, Christy.
Yeah. Thanks, Myra. I will add, we've had a few more people join the conversation. You mentioned that petition for rulemaking that we received. Ben Cunningham has joined us from SCELP. I think I missed introducing Paula Macho, who's from SELC, and then I know from our side, Sarah Martinez is here from our Office of General Counsel as well. Is there anyone else we've missed on the introduction side? May have missed some who have joined by phone as well. So. Well, to all who are here, we really appreciate having a full room, and I want to turn things over to Crystal to start our conversation. Crystal?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Crystal Rippey. I manage the Industrial Wastewater Permitting Section here at DHEC. Can you hear me okay? I hope. I have my mask on. If I need to take it off, I will. As Christy mentioned, we would like your feedback on a number of topics today. So kind of the order of the discussion is we're going to go over the purpose of the notice of drafting. We're going to summarize the South Carolina Administrative Procedures Act. We're going to describe the petition for rulemaking and the summary of comments received, and then go over what we see as potential revisions. And of course, we want your feedback on this. We're going to have little breaks in that discussion to get your feedback, and then we're going to talk about next steps and schedule. So the purpose of the NOD, or Notice of Drafting, was to amend parts of R61-9 to specify requirements as needed for analysis, monitoring, record keeping, and reporting related to per- and polyfluoroalkyl substances, or PFAS, in sludge and effluent intended for land application. So potentially affected sections, we're primarily focusing on 503, 504, and 505, which outlines the requirements for the use and disposal of sewage sludge, industrial sludge, and 505 is kind of the overarching reg for 503 and 504, but it also addresses effluent. We included 122 in the NOD as it relates to land application, just in case there were parts that we needed to modify in that section as well. So the South Carolina Administrative Procedures Act, there's a number of steps to this. The first step we've already completed, which is the Notice of Drafting. It sets up an initial public notice of upcoming regulatory revisions in the state register. It's a 30-day comment period associated with the Notice of Drafting. And state agencies have 1 year from the notice date to complete the APA process. Stakeholder engagement is part of the process, and that's where we're at right now. So we conduct stakeholder meetings as necessary, and we consider public comments in our drafting of proposed regulations. The notice of proposed regulation is the next step. It specifies new regulatory text and/or changes to existing text. It sets the time and date of the public hearing and another 30-day comment period on the proposed revisions. Board approval is required before this step. The notice of final regulation is the final version of regulatory revisions before going to the board. It's submitted to the DHEC board for final determination of need and reasonableness of proposed regulatory development action. Changes to proposed regulations are driven by stakeholder comments. As part of that, there's also a public hearing. It occurs immediately after the presentation of the notice of final regulation to the board. It allows the public to provide comments on the proposed action directly to the board, and board approval of the notice of final regulation is required to advance to the next step, which is legislative review. During legislative review, DHEC submits the notice of final regulation to the South Carolina General Assembly. The General Assembly has 120 days of the legislative session to approve or disapprove the NFR. Upon legislative approval or completion of the 120 days, the Legislative Council publishes the NFR in the state register, and revised regulations take effect upon the date of this publication. As Christy and Myra mentioned, we received a petition for rulemaking from the South Carolina Environmental Law Project, or SCELP, on behalf of petitioners. In this petition for rulemaking, sought changes to R61-9504, or an emergency regulation, including analysis for PFAS and industrial sludge or effluent, unless determined conclusively by the generator that none of its processes will lead to generation of sludge with these chemicals. Disallowing land application if contaminated by PFAS above concentrations, and they used Maine numbers as an example. If below concentrations allowed by Maine, set appropriate limits for the protection of groundwater and surface water. If PFAS present, require groundwater and surface water monitoring, groundwater sediment monitoring of existing land application sites if PFAS is present in sludge in excessive amounts, and sampling of nearby private wells, and recommends sampling for the toxic release inventory list. And it also recommends assessment of potentially affected crops, livestock, and dairy. So we had a number of commenters during the notice of drafting. We had comments from the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, Denali, doing business as Terra Renewal Services, Lawrence County Water and Sewer Commission, South Carolina Environmental Law Project, South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation, South Carolina Water Quality Association, Southern Environmental Law Center, and U.S. Poultry and Egg Association. And we have quite a few comments. These are obviously not word for word of all the comments received, but they're kind of the big boxes, so to speak, and I'm not going to go through every one of these. I did want to just point out a few. So we had concerns about, interim health advisory levels, and, an urgency to wait until MCLs are established. We had concerns about draft methods. We did have, general support for including monitoring. We had requests to include pre and post monitoring, of sites that may be affected by PFAS. And we had a lot of requests for, monitoring, obviously, for PFAS and different media. And we had requests to set limits, either based on mains numbers, which were published in 2018, or a tiered approach such as Michigan is using. So those are kind of some of the highlights. Again, I'm not going through all of these because we have 4 pages, and just in the interest of time, and so we can get feedback from you, we'll skip over all of that. But of course, you should receive these in advance from Christy, so if you have questions about these, we can come back to these later. So Christy, did you want to, is there anybody with their hand up, or I can't see that screen, so Christy's going to have to be live for me.
Yeah, Crystal, I don't see a hand raised at this time, but this is a good time to maybe open that to some questions or comments, or there's some initial thoughts from the group about the process and where we are, or the summary to comments. Okay, Crystal, I think we can keep going, but again, please use the chat or raise a hand, and we're happy to make sure we're having those conversations.
So as we proceed through what we're proposing for regulations, I want to point out what we already have as well. So there's a number of regulations that I'll be describing in here that shows our existing authority. So we have already in 5035 and 5045 the ability to impose requirements for the use and disposal of sludge, in addition to, or more stringent than, the requirements in those parts when necessary to protect public health and the environment from any adverse effects of a pollutant in sewage sludge. So that's a pretty broad authority that I just wanted to point out that already exists in the regulations. As we go through these topics, we kind of have it broken out into groups. We have, and after each group is, I think that's when Christy is planning on opening up for further discussion. So we'll talk a little bit about applicability, permit application requirements, sampling and analysis, use of draft methods in one group, monitoring and frequency of monitoring in one group, soil and groundwater monitoring and additional groundwater authority, limitations and screening levels, record keeping and reporting, sections unique to 503, and timelines and schedules. This next slide is just kind of a roadmap of proposed changes as they appear in the regulation. And we also shared with you in advance kind of a more detailed summary of those proposed changes. So I'm not going to go through this, but just so you'll have it as a reference. Just kind of the order of the changes that we're thinking about making. So for some of these slides, they're kind of the words that explain what's happening on the next slide. So I'm going to kind of skip over those so you can see kind of the meat of the changes that we want to make. And so for applicability, we looked at these sections and we felt like there was a few changes we needed to make 503 more consistent with 504, and to also correct kind of a mistake that was in 504.10d. So we're proposing to revise 503 to allow for the applicability of 503 to bulk material derived from sewage sludge. Say that 3 times really fast. If sewage sludge from which it's derived contains other pollutants that may cause a public health or environmental problem. That's consistent with language we have in, or at least the intent of the language in 504.10d, although we are correcting a typo there. We're also proposing to revise 503.10g to hinge relaxation of applicability to a requirement that the sewage sludge from which the material that is sold or given away in a bag or container for application to the land is derived, from which it's derived, must not contain other pollutants that may cause a public health or environmental problem. Again, that's consistent with existing language in 504.10G. And then we're proposing to correct what we believe is a typo in the original 504.10D by revising the section to allow for the applicability of 504 default material derived from industrial sludge if industrial sludge from which it's derived contains other pollutants that may cause a public health or environmental problem. Does anybody have any questions or thoughts about the applicability section?
So again, as Crystal was noting, this is a lot about consistency. Looks like Paul Calamita, you have some questions?
If you don't mind, just a comment. The language "or contains other pollutants that may cause a public health or environmental problem," I would suggest it really should be "contains other pollutants at a level that may cause." I mean, just because you detect something, if it's not at a level that is of concern for public health and the environment, I'm not sure it should trigger the regulatory requirements.
Okay, thank you for that feedback. Good feedback. Great comment.
And is there, this is Ruth Albright, is there some place in the regulations where where problem is defined? Because isn't it a negative health outcome or a negative impact to an environmental media that's really the issue? I mean, problem is a pretty vague word, so.
I think you may be referring to the definition of pollutant, and I don't have it up right now, but I believe that kind of gets to the gist of what you're talking about. So I believe we have people in the room looking it up for us. So it would be the definition, I believe, in either 505 or 503 and 504.
Yeah, shouldn't that language really say an adverse impact to public health or the environment?
Well, it says, contains other pollutants that may cause a public health or environmental problem. So the definition of pollutant in 503, pollutant is an organic substance, an inorganic substance, a combination of organic and inorganic substances, or a pathogenic organism that after discharge and upon exposure, ingestion, inhalation, or assimilation into an organism, either directly from the environment or indirectly by ingestion through the food chain, could, on the basis of information available to the department, cause death, disease, behavioral abnormalities, cancer, genetic mutations, psychological malfunctions, including malfunction in reproduction, physiological, not psychological, excuse me, or physical deformations in either organisms or offspring of other organisms. So that's the kind of the broad definition of pollutant, and thank you, Brenda, for looking that up for me. So I guess the thought is, at a level that can cause public health or environmental problems, is that kind of the general direction of the comment from both Paul and Ruth? Am I capturing that correctly?
From my perspective, yes. I mean, it's always dose and response that matters, right? So the concentration that causes an adverse impact is really what's of concern.
Okay. All right, we've made a note of that. Does anybody else have any thoughts or questions or comments?
Looks like maybe Ben Cunningham is
yeah, I guess my
unmuting.
question, sorry, Christy. My question relates to the dose or the idea that there are levels when DEC is, I believe later it's described as going to issue permits on a case-by-case basis. And of course with PFAS, unlike some of these other pollutants, because of their durability, that it's, there's a cumulative aspect of the dose, and that if there is a lower dose early that may not have on its own a link to adverse health effects, it can be augmented with additional sludge that's used at a particular site to reach a particular level. And so I don't know if this is the time to address that, or if we're going to do that later when we talk about pollutant limits, or address the idea of taking baseline or background levels for groundwater and sediment, that sort of thing. But the idea that there are levels is certainly a valid one, but it's somewhat different in this context, especially given that these are forever chemicals, would be my comment on that.
Certainly, and we are planning to have sections to talk about limitations and, our thoughts on what we see as a potential approach to that. So if you want, we can wait and talk about that when we get to that section.
That's fine. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Can I make one other comment?
Sure.
Sure.
And so we've kind of dived in here. You've laid out the petition and things like asking for the main screening numbers for PFOA and PFOS. And kind of before we get into all the detail, on behalf of the municipal community, both drinking water and wastewater, we don't try to put our finger on the scale on either side. We're on both sides of the equation. We don't create any pollution or PFAS. We just treat it and we charge the public for it. And we try to have responsible environmental programs like land application of biosolids, which I've done this 30 years, and there's been a number of issues raised about land application of biosolids. We've always overcome them with transparency and good science. This is the first time, like if you say the main screening numbers, there is zero land application of biosolids in South Carolina from the moment forward you put those numbers as a requirement. Those PFAS then get incinerated, which just moves the PFAS around, or it goes to a landfill and we're just moving the PFAS around. So, we are very concerned about jumping to a program that establishes limitations. We think the right approach is to characterize municipal biosolids for their PFAS concentrations, and if there are, and everybody should minimize. And there's been some great successes around the country with wastewater plants in particular, being able to work in a non-regulatory manner with their non-domestic users to minimize their PFAS loading significantly. We think that's the right approach, and biosolids that have concentrations that are outside of the normal domestic biosolids that may be industrially impacted, maybe those shouldn't be land applied. But we just can't live. We don't think it's environmentally responsible or public health responsible to send biosolids to landfills. And by the way, the landfills don't want them. Their view is if you can't land apply it, we don't want it in our municipal landfill, and then the PFAS is just going to come out and leachate, which is an extremely difficult media to treat, and come back to the wastewater plants. So I just have to express grave concern about any regulation, and we're not in the business of avoiding necessary and appropriate regulation, but this is a major issue that we think is counterproductive environmentally and from a public health perspective. So I just need to put that out there before we get into too much more detail. Thank you.
Hey, this is Rob Devlin, and we agree 100% that a no discharge of any type of land application is not something that we're advocating for. In fact, we're quite the opposite. We want to do what you're saying, and that is find the safe levels at which we can put. And in some areas of the state, we may be able to put higher PFAS levels than in other areas. So we're going to look at all of that kind of from a source perspective and from a how to protect the waters and the things that we need to, both surface water and groundwater. So we're not advocating that we go to a zero no discharge like you were saying. We are 100% in the mode of scientifically looking at what is it we have. We don't really know what's in our waste streams at this moment, and one of the things we've been advocating for the last couple months is how do we get to a point where we can have samples, take a look at them, and we're calling it monitoring and reporting so that we can build this baseline database and know what we have as we're doing this. And I think that's really where we're coming from today, is to get that ability to have the samples taken and then build a database to look at what we have. Anybody else got any?
I've been taking a few notes too, Crystal, just to kind of summarize those comments. So I'll make sure we can either go back to that or I can swap kind of who's sharing the screen if that works better for you. What would you prefer, Crystal?
Whatever works for you, Christy. I took a few notes
Yeah.
as well. Characterize, minimize, as far as the actual applicability words on the screen, say pollutants at a level that may cause a public health or environmental problem.
And some of the words we use in the groundwater side are may cause an adverse effect to public health or the environment. So we'll play around with some words that we have in some other regulations as well that kind of give that broad brush of we're trying to protect both health and the environment from adverse effects. So as to make it look like we're not setting a standard today, we're going to set standards. EPA setting standards for groundwater and other things. So we'll wordsmith that, I guess, and bring it up to the next meeting.
Sure.
All right. Other thoughts on applicability, or can we move on to that permit application? Okay, Crystal, let's keep going.
Okay, I'm kind of skipping over that descriptive slide here again and getting to the meat of it. But with regard to application requirements, we're proposing to modify 503.12.011 and 504.12.011 to specify using EPA method 1633. And then also clarify that the draft method can be used in the interim, but that the latest version of the EPA method should be used. The reason we're doing this is that is the only method that EPA has recommended for sludge. So it analyzes about 40 compounds, but it's the only method we're aware of that EPA is recommending at this time for sludge. That method can also be used for the analysis of effluent, and we're also proposing to modify 505.21F18 to specify method 1633. And keep in mind, again, 505 is kind of that overarching part of the regulations that covers both 503 and 504 as well. We're having to put it in 505, or we need to put it in 505, I should say, because that covers effluent also. And that's the only place where land application of effluent is covered. And so we're proposing to specify method 1633 for sludge and effluent, and also method 1621, which is absorbable organic fluoride, I believe, methods. It's kind of more of a total method. It doesn't speciate. It just kind of tells us whether or not fluorides are there or not. And it actually would include more than PFAS, but it's just kind of a screening tool that 1633 would actually speciate 40 compounds that I mentioned. And then, consistent with that, we're proposing to modify the sampling and analysis portions of the regs, which are 503.8B and 504.8B, to specify that the latest published version of each method should be used, and then also to specify by adding number 8 that the second draft method, 1633, should be used And again, as methods are revised, any method, not just PFAS, the proposed revision above would allow for the most current method to be used, current version of the method to be used. And then I wanted to speak, because we did get comments on the use of draft methods, so I did want to speak to that a little bit. So we can require monitoring according to test procedures approved under 40 CFR Part 136, or as identified in R61.9, 503, and 504, or in accordance to test procedures specified in the permit. And specifically, if we put these methods in 503 and 504, that's essentially the department approving the use of those methods. But we also have the flexibility built in the regs already to specify methods and permits that don't have approved methods according to the existing regulations. And then I think, Christy, we were going to kind of take a break after that section to see if anybody had any feedback on those sections regarding the application information and sampling and analysis.
Yeah, I saw Paul turn on his camera, and then I see a hand raised too. So, Paul, you want to kick us off?
We could have gone to the hand raise first. I'm sorry, I don't know how to do that. But let me just suggest we are perfectly fine using method 1633 and sharing those data with the department. And I tell all of our members to post those data on the web. We think the method has been pretty consistent, like influent, effluent. We've been really pleasantly surprised. We think it's probably decent, but it is not an approved method, and it should not. If you're going to do what those slides just did, there needs to be a caveat that says that those data do not need to be certified because it's not an approved method. EPA Science Advisory Board recently has raised major concerns with the validity of the method. I know nothing about that. We want to give you the data, we will give you the data, but it's not proper to require it to be certified as true, accurate, complete, because we don't think it is. I note that even EPA doesn't impose 1633 in any permits in the country. In Region 1, they put language in saying that the 1633 requirement is triggered 6 months after the method is finalized. So I don't think South Carolina should be the one state imposing 1633 when it's not ready for prime time. But again, happy with the requirement to provide you the non-certified data from that testing. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Paul. Just to point out, we haven't gotten direct guidance to the states yet, but EPA did issue kind of guidance to their regions that are issuing federally issued permits, and they did encourage the use of 1633 and 1621, which is the AOF method, the absorbable organic fluorides, including for biosolids. So it may not be exist in practice yet, but that was kind of the direction that EPA did give to their regions.
Yes, but my understanding is that EPA is not doing that. I can, if anybody, Crystal, or whoever wants it, I'll send you some EPA Region 1 permits from this year that have the language as I specify. Now, I'll just tell you, it's a non-starter for us. We will strenuously object and challenge any requirement to use a non-final method that we have to certify. Again, happy to give you those data by letter or just non-certified with the application. But if we're not going to start a precedent where a draft method we have to certify as true, accurate, complete, a draft method with EPA's own Science Advisory Board saying it's not quite ready for prime time. So I'm not trying to be difficult, but that's sacrosanct.
Yeah, I know, and you're getting to the certification aspect of it, and we're just getting to the use of it, and so I think that's kind of where we're maybe not seeing each other's side, but certainly just send us, any comments you have on that, and we'll take a look at it. We're not, at least at this point, we're not proposing certification, but that's something that's kind of a fluid topic, and, you know, we'll be discussing more about that as time progresses.
Well, and I think, you know, another thing that it really emphasizes is the quality of the data, and methodology is part of that formula. So certainly, you know, we want to make sure that our decisions moving forward, that we consider those uncertainties in the methodology, and just as it progresses, the process of, because I think it's in the second draft now for multi-lab validation. So we're going to watch that very closely. I mean, we certainly, like I said, don't want to just assume that it's going to be approved. We're getting hints it will, but at the end of the day, we want to be very confident in the data and the decisions we're making based on that data.
Thanks, Myra. And looks like we have Lauren Miller from Denali. Lauren?
Thanks, Christy. So, yeah, I mean, just to continue the conversation about this being a draft method, our concern is, of course, the validity of the data, but also the fact once we submit it or anybody else submits the data, it's public information. So we're concerned, you know, if it's not accurate, the public could get their hands on something and not understand that fully and kind of have this reaction of, oh my gosh, it's full of PFAS, or, you know, it could of course go the other way where it's not showing very high levels. So I guess our comment from Denali is just that, you know, we really feel like we should wait for an EPA approved method. So this way we're providing accurate data and that we're not giving the public information that isn't relevant.
Thank you.
And I do have one follow-up question too. Are there any labs in South Carolina that are certified by DHEC to run this? I know that's a requirement for every other parameter in the permits.
So, no, we do not have any certified laboratories at this point.
Okay, thank you.
Crystal, is that something that we could maybe, and I imagine somebody has an inventory of the labs, and I imagine a lot of these folks on this stakeholder group probably are aware, but it would be interesting to see how many labs are certified across the country, or do you know that?
We think we can get that information. So Benny Cockrell, who's over our laboratory certification program, sent me a tool that includes the NELAC certified labs, and I haven't played around with it yet. I've been focusing on this, but I'll play around with that tool and see if I can get the universe of NELAC certified labs. You know, there's also other states that have their own laboratory certification programs for PFAS that we can refer to, and Benny had recommended several states that we could potentially look to as well.
Are there some additional kind of questions, concerns, or thoughts relative to
yeah, this is Ruth Albright. Along the lines of what Paul and Lauren are talking about, then, is the department going to propose to create a separate form to attach to the NPDES permit DMR, or include the DMR that has this data on it? Because the lack of a certificate, well, having a certification on there, but then the lack of a certified lab that's recognized by South Carolina makes that data unreportable under your standard requirements. So that really puts people who are monitoring for these compounds in kind of a no-win situation. You're asking them to do analysis, you're asking them to report it, but the lab that's running the data doesn't have a certification, and you're asking someone to sign their DMR and the certification statement on their DMR. So what's the agency's plan to address that?
We do have other forms other than the DMR form on which we can receive information that we've created in our e-permitting system, which I know y'all all love as much as we do. But we do have a supplemental information form that's available in e-permitting, and we also have a DMR attachment form that is not actually attached to the DMR, but it can be submitted concurrently with the DMR. So we have a couple of options as far as the ability to receive data.
And is there some plan in the works to issue some sort of guidance? Because we've seen this, we've seen some monitoring and report language in some draft NPDES permits recently. And so is there an intent to provide some guidance to permittees as far as how the state's looking to receive that data? Another question there, I know with the change in the health advisory limit, everybody's analytical detection limits have been thrown into disarray, but is there also some guidance that the state's going to provide to entities about what is an acceptable detection limit? There's all manner of things around analytical that get to be a bit interesting in this situation.
As far as detection limits, that's something we'll have to talk about with our laboratory certification group, and they usually advise us on our practical quantitation limits. And we have a list of PQLs for other pollutants. That's something we can talk about adding to that PQL list. But we would have to get feedback from laboratory certification and potentially EPA on that as well. Maybe their laboratories to get more information on a PQL.
And then another question on the analytical side. So I am not familiar with the exact list of analytes that can be detected under 1633. But I have concerns about 1621 because it's sort of like, just in a gross manner, it's sort of like measuring COD and then running, say, what is it, 824, 825, I think is the right method in wastewater, and not knowing how to think about a COD measurement versus individual organics that are present in wastewater. So as a kind of analogy, you now have something that's going to tell you something about fluorine containing compounds, but you may or may not have something that's included on the analyte list in 1633. So what I'm getting at is many of us have been in the situation of having to negotiate over tentatively identified compounds that you don't really know what they are. You don't know why they're present in your discharge, other than it may be a byproduct of a chemical reaction, or it may be some byproduct of degradation in your wastewater treatment facility. And so you're then chasing ghosts, if you will have it, for knowing what compound you're actually interested in. Again, have you all thought about how you're going to handle those two issues, which is the whole presence of unidentified fluorine-containing compounds that you've measured by a 1621, and then tentatively identified compounds that haven't been quantified, so you don't know what the detector response is. You get into a whole raft of issues with analytical at that point.
I think, our intent was to use 1621 as a screening tool, which is, I think that's how EPA intended the method, and just to, obviously if things are flagged on 1621, we may, and we haven't really, I'll admit, we need to talk this through a little bit more, but this is just kind of me speaking off the top of my head. We may, ask the facility if it's a concern, if 1621 is showing there could be PFAS present, at a concerning level, then we may ask the facility to you know, maybe do an evaluation of what you're using, and if there's ways to minimize that. Does anybody else have any thoughts on that?
I was going to say, do we have some other thoughts or questions here?
Guys, right now we're just looking for any comments you've got. We're not really going to discuss all the answers right now, but anything you've got to share with us, we definitely appreciate it. Ruth, appreciate the comments. That's the purpose of the stakeholder meeting, is for us to receive the information, receive your questions, so we can pour over it and provide you with the best answer later on. So please keep them coming. Crystal's doing a great job fielding the questions right now, and we appreciate them, but we're not going to get pinned down on any one answer right now. We're going to keep on moving forward. Crystal?
Well, let me add a little bit, Crystal and Sean. I mean, there's a lot of questions we can't answer.
Absolutely.
And I think that's what has made this whole issue so difficult. So, like you said, you start thinking about these issues and kind of have some thoughts, but then there's so many additional doors or gaps that come open based on how you're trying to address and tackle this issue. So I think at the end of the day, I think we need to get back to really the main question and the concern, I think, of the legislature, and Scout, y'all feel free to chime in with your petition for rulemaking, is while EPA has made this a priority and they're focusing on all these many things, because this is the first time that I've ever dealt with an issue that EPA has not had everything already thought through. They are tossing the hot potato to the states right now. And that makes our work even more challenging. And so the question we have to ask ourselves is, we do have some examples out there where land application has impacted private wells. That's what we got to stay focused on. And we need y'all's help to try to figure out, are there some ideas of how we can address that? Like I said, we're not saying that we've got this figured out. We don't have this figured out yet. I appreciate, like I said, just already the conversations, because just the methodology has been a conversation of ours internally, and that certainly resonates with us. But what are your thoughts about the impacts to private wells from the practice? Right now, I know in the future we're going to have much more information. But I know, it makes us very concerned knowing that there might be some future private wells that are impacted, and what should we be focused on?
If I might, ours, again, we're a public health group. We're a local government. I quite frankly, I don't really care what it costs. Other than we do care about low income and fixed income folks. Our view is that you should not do anything about the EPA interim health advisory levels until they adopt MCLs. And when they adopt MCLs, we'll deal with them. And in the interim, we ought to all try to minimize, less is better. We ought to embark on programs that have been very successful in a lot of states and cities around the country, of trying to minimize the PFAS that is in the wastewater effluent and biosolids by working with our non-domestic users. But we should continue the current programs. There should be no ban on new land application sites, unless those solids have levels of PFAS that are, industrially impacted, kind of the Michigan approach. If it's industrial impacted, we don't land apply it. If it's not industrially impacted, we can land apply it. We can continue to land apply it while minimizing, while waiting for the science to catch up. So, you know, that's kind of our position is, and sampling as well. We are open. We support characterizing biosolids and our effluent and our finished drinking water for PFAS levels. But our view is the PFAS levels have never been lower, and I think the science supports that. The CDC has data from 2000, and the body burden of everybody on this call, unless there's some isolated hotspot, is dramatically lower than it was in 2000, and that trend is only going to accelerate with all the attention on PFAS, and we don't want to throw away an important environmental program like land application of municipal biosolids, you know, when we're not there from a scientific basis, and also the alternatives are just not great. And every well, if the EPA health advisory levels stay where they are, every private well is probably going to have some detectable PFAS, and we're just talking about PFOA, PFOS. There's a couple thousand more. So at some point, every private well is probably going to trip some number if they're really at that level of, you know, if they're in the 0.004 and 0.002 parts per trillion, you know, those folks are going to have to be on public water supply with GAC, and the environmental programs like land application really need to continue because there's no good alternative, no better. It's the lesser of the three evils. So that's our view, is that we should minimize, we should characterize, minimize, and then regulate.
Thank you for those comments. So I'm interested in other views of those of you who agree with that approach versus maybe some different approaches.
I think we have a hand raised from Jimmy Martis with Denali, and I'm trying to take some notes as we go and share those. So let me know if I'm summarizing things correctly. Jimmy?
Yeah, and Jimmy Martis Denali, and I was a little late getting on, so I wasn't introduced, but I apologize for that. But I've been on for a little while now and agree with a lot of the comments that were just made about the biosolids issue that affects us too. But I have a couple of questions. I don't know if this is the appropriate time, so I apologize if it's not a little out of order. But one question I have for you, and as we go through this, as you guys go through this process, I'm understanding it could take up to 6 months for this process to go through. What is the status of any permit renewals, permit modifications while you guys are going through this regulatory process? Because that makes a big deal for our customers, and we're concerned about in this crazy time in the world right now where fertilizer is very expensive, a lot of things are going on, that we have farmers that are very interested in getting material, but we're being held up by the possibly being held up during this process. So I'm not sure what could you guys answer where you're at on that? And I have one other question, but I'll stop with that.
Hey, this is Rob Devlin with DHEC. I'll start that, and if I need to, I'll shoot it over to Sean. But currently, from our standpoint, we have not told anybody who has an existing or even a permit that's under renewal that they cannot continue to apply as they have been. What we have been asking for is that if you want to add new sites to your permit that have not been disposed on before, that you sampled PFAS before you put any type of solids or sludge or things down. That's kind of been our stance at this moment, and we're still in the middle of trying to figure out the best way to do that. And one of the things that I brought up or was looking at a second ago when we started looking at these methods and sampling and different things like that, is there a way for us to have some type of research method as opposed to the standard method that we would use for drinking water compliance, and list it as a research method as opposed to a standard compliance method? And I just want to toss that out to see if that's something that I read that on the EPA fact FAQ, so I thought maybe we'd throw that out. But do you want to, Sean, do you want to add to anything on our permitting status at the moment?
Rob, you pretty much covered it. They can keep on applying as they have been, no problem whatsoever. It is the new fields we're concerned about preventing any contamination going there with PFAS. But as far as the research methodology, that is one approach we can take, is us just gather data, not for regulatory purposes, just gathering it, so we know what's going on out there, because it's a hard time for us to make informed decisions if we don't have the information.
And maybe label it as research method would prevent it from being out in the public domain from a standpoint of them making, because we're not making decisions on it, we're just gathering information and going to use that down the road for us to do exactly what you were saying. How do we minimize it? Obviously, and I've told Myra and Jennifer this, that if I have 100 tons of PFAS at 500 and I mix another 100 tons at 0, now I'm at 50. So, I mean, there are methods that we can use to begin to reduce PFAS if we know what the numbers are before we put it out. And
minimize the risk.
Yes, and minimize the risk, exactly what you're saying. So that is our approach. That's what we want to do. We're just trying to get through these hurdles of helping you guys, but also not putting you guys in a bad situation, but giving us the information we need to continue making the best scientific decisions we can.
Okay, to kind of answer your point, if you could get, the problem is, and it was discussed earlier by other commenters, once that information goes into your agency, anybody can FOIA and get that information. Is that correct? Regardless of what you want to call it, research or compliance or whatever.
Well, as far as I know at this moment, yes, but that doesn't mean that we cannot have these discussions with our people down in the office who deal with the FOI and see if there's ways or other things that we can do while we're studying the problems and we're waiting on that kind of standard method to be approved. So we'll have those conversations and get back.
Okay. Well, the concern is once the information gets out in this environment where people don't understand what these levels or limits levels are very low for the most part. What that really means, because of just there's no EPA has not come out with guidance on that. So, and that's once again gets back to our concern why we would prefer to wait until EPA comes out with more guidance. And when that occurs, we would support the state in whatever process we have to go through. The other question I have for you guys, is there a cost benefit analysis that will be done on this process change? Because as I mentioned before, if we can't land apply biosolids, if we can't land apply industrial sludge, what's the cost of having to take that material somewhere? What is that going to cost all of these customers that are the municipalities in food processing, industrial facilities? What is the cost of all this going to be for this new process if we're not able to do the land application?
Yeah, and again, to reiterate, we're not to a point right now that we're even asking anybody not to land apply at any level. We just, in fact, we're telling people continue on as you were as we begin to gather more data and get more information. We don't know what the levels going on a piece of property in the sand hills and how much like nitrogen. We know if you put a certain amount of nitrogen in and it builds up over a couple of years, you could have some problems. It's a breakthrough and it getting into the groundwater and people's wells. We don't really have that great idea of PFAS yet. We're still looking at other states. There's a lot of people are doing work on that. So we're not willing to come up with a number right now, but we would like it to be as low as possible and as little as you can under your thing. But we're not to a point of limiting anybody at this moment. But I do believe that if you were to sample and find it very high, that you would probably not go out and just land apply it, but we would find different ways to wait, using that old waste minimization techniques that we used to use in the old days and come up with a way to get this to a comparable or at least something that everybody would feel safe at.
But I mean, you hit my question, and the point is when you say if it's very high, I mean, we don't know what very high means. Does anybody know what very high means? What does that mean?
Yeah, we don't, and you know, even EPA is struggling with this, I can tell you that. Just the dramatic change in the risk levels have really got them kind of stepping back. I mean, it's obvious to me talking to the different assistant administrators for EPA, you know, looking at the big picture, all the things that you need to be thinking about how to tackle this issue. So I think you're right. That's just it's changed a lot of things for us. That change in that level, and the detection levels and things of that nature.
Yeah, and we have some risk assessors in here, but I will tell you over the last 5 years, I have seen a very big change in the public. They want zero risk, and that just doesn't exist. There's nothing has a zero risk. I don't care what it is. Drinking coffee is risky, and everything else. There is nothing with a zero risk. And yes, I get your point. And we've had these same conversations internally here that there is no zero risk, and a lot of people out there right now don't want anything at all. So yeah, we get that.
Appreciate your openness to concerns about public availability of data, but I think that concern is misguided. There's an old saying, a well-defined problem is half solved. And so my view is that every responsible discharger, whether you're a direct discharger or an indirect discharger, there's enough public health concern about PFAS chemicals that you should characterize PFAS in your effluent. And there have been many easy, low-hanging fruit, non-costly approaches taken by a wide range of industries to significantly reduce their PFAS loadings. It could be product substitution. You know, they didn't realize there was PFAS in a particular product, and their vendor hands them a second product that's the same cost or less. There's been a whole bunch of successes that, to my experience, have not put a single industry out of business or local government, and we need to be doing that. And I've always told our folks to publish your data, because when the health advisory level was at 70 parts per trillion, I told them we don't know where it's going, but it's probably going down, and you don't want to surrender the moral high ground of having taken time and money to collect the data and then hidden it. And so we've always just put it on a web page. We don't make a huge deal out of it because we don't know what it means, but we put it out there. And I think most industries in South Carolina need to participate voluntarily in characterizing their waste streams, and if there are opportunities for cooperative reductions, that's in everybody's best interest. That's in the industry's best interest. It's in whoever's got to deal with the solids that are residual from the process. So, you know, that's our view. We would not ask the department to try in any way to allow us to withhold any of these data from public FOIA.
Thanks for that, Paul. I'm trying to capture some of these comments and some impacts to focus on. So looking at those ways to minimize the risk, minimize the exposure to PFAS is coming up. How is this going to impact permit renewals or new permits? Looking at methodology, looking at cost benefit analysis, and of course, kind of where we started was that impact on private wells. Are there some other impacts that we need to be considering and focusing on as we have these discussions?
Christy, can we get maybe some feedback, just overall waste management strategies? You know, just like I said, I think just this one particular narrow focus on PFAS really touches on the waste management strategies. You know, the material
waste minimization.
Yeah. You know, it's got to go somewhere. So how whether it goes to a landfill or it goes somewhere else, as far as land application, how do you minimize or try to reduce those levels so you have less impact? until we get, I guess, to the point where complete destruction of these chemicals, and then that's what everybody's looking forward to, the day of that. But it's not there yet, right?
It is not, but obviously the reduction that we've had in actual PFAS in the environment, or not in the environment, in the industry, has gone down. It's gone down significantly over the last few years, and once we banned it from having it, from at least producing it here, that's really helped. And South Carolina hasn't, to my knowledge, had any producers. Does anybody know if we?
We're not aware of any manufacturers.
Yeah. So we're in better shape than a few places that we know had some. In North Carolina, I think it comes to 1, right?
Relative source contribution for drinking water is only about 20%. But there's a lot of consumer goods that are contributing.
Yeah, but identifying these and reducing them and doing what you guys were saying earlier on these talks is exactly what we think needs to be done, because landfill space is very difficult to get new landfill space, and we don't need to be putting things in that could be beneficial to the rest of the area, like the farmers and the things that can be taken up and used in that beneficial way is what we want, not putting it to a landfill and then concentrating the PFAS like we do when we have the leachate. Leachate from a landfill and the PFAS is probably as bad as it gets, outside of maybe straight PFAS being manufactured.
So there's some ideas and things y'all been kicking around about site selections for land applications, and just some best practices there.
Our current ideas from a geology standpoint is to try to identify areas of the state where groundwater is what we call vulnerable to surface contamination. So where the drinking water is being used at a fairly routine basis in shallow wells with very little clays and things like in the upper coastal plain. When we use what we call source water protection, we're trying to find out where vulnerability is higher in certain areas and where it's less vulnerable to the pollutants in other areas of the state. So having a one-stop shop, I had told Myra earlier, was probably not the best way for us to handle things that go onto the ground like this. That we may want to look at more of a vulnerability approach, and then the levels would be adjusted based on the depth of the water and the ability for the protection from the natural, as well as just nobody using the water for drinking or other purposes. But these are just ideas that we're looking at, and we're certainly going to bring these up to you guys and get more information from you all. Christy?
Rob was talking about the geology approach. I guess this is another time to check in with some of the different stakeholders we have here. Is there an agricultural perspective or environmental perspective or municipal perspective of kind of the waste management strategies? How can we minimize and reduce the levels and have less impact from PFAS? Right, y'all keep thinking. Crystal, I see you've kind of gotten the slides back up, so if you want to talk a little further.
Sure, yeah, my computer timed out a second ago during the discussion, so I had to kind of reset everything. But the next section we were going to talk about was, monitoring. And again, this kind of speaks to the existing authority we already have in the regs. So in 503.13d and 504.13d, we can require monitoring for additional parameters on an individual project basis. And we have something similar in 505, which says each pollutant limited in the permit and is necessary to characterize any other pollutant which may be in the wastewater, which has significant potential to have an effect on the environment or operation of treatment or disposal facilities. And again, because 505 is kind of that umbrella reg, it, even though it talks about wastewater specifically here, obviously sludge is generated from wastewater, so this also applies indirectly to sludge. The next few slides talk about the frequency of monitoring, and these are the sections where we felt like we needed to make 503 consistent with 504. We already have existing language in 504 that references other pollutants listed in the NPDES or land application permit. And so we were proposing to do that in a number of places in 503 just to, make it consistent. So, so this slide talks about sewage sludge. The next slide talks about domestic septage. And so, the thoughts are just making those consistent with requirements in 504. And then we also have, requirements for soil and groundwater monitoring that already exist in the regs. That was a comment that we received, pre-application and post-application monitoring. And we already have the authority under the regs to do that. So we can establish pre-application and post-application site monitoring, and if necessary, establish permit conditions which require the permittee to reduce, modify, or eliminate the sludge applications based on the results of this data. And, we can modify or revoke and reissue or revoke a permit based on the data. Now, again, as Rob emphasized, we're looking to gather information at this point, but we're just kind of pointing out the existing authority that we have in the regs. And then we also have, requirements for groundwater monitoring. This is 505, which talks about the different types of land application of effluent. There's a number of sections where this language appears, stating that additional parameters may be required in the initial background groundwater analysis and subsequent groundwater monitoring thereafter, that such needs will be assessed on an individual project basis. The language for reclaimed water systems differs slightly, but really the intent is the same. And then we also have a whole bunch of language in the regulations. I think I only highlighted 4 places, but I think it actually occurs more than that in the regs about if we find deleterious effects to groundwater. So, if a significant adverse trend occurs, then it's the responsibility of the generator preparer, the sludge, to basically assess the extent of characterization, and the department has the ability to require remediation in the groundwater. So, and Christy, I may have kind of lumped a couple of sections together. I think we were going to take a break after frequency of monitoring.
I think we did, Crystal, but let's, if you want to finish this one, we'll go back to that monitoring discussion.
Well, and that,
you good?
Since it's all about, since it's all about monitoring anyway, I kind of lumped the 2 sections together, but basically this monitoring section that I just went over kind of talks about our existing authority, but we can back up to expanding frequency of monitoring in 503 to include other pollutants listed in NPDES or land application permits, and see what everyone's thoughts are on that portion.
So we've definitely already had a few comments about monitoring in our discussion so far. Are there some questions or concerns or thoughts that anybody has on kind of the monitoring, frequency of monitoring, groundwater monitoring? I see y'all have given up on the reaction of raise the hand. I like the camera is now the way to raise the hand. So Angie, I think you're unmute, Angie. We might need you to unmute.
Thank you.
The camera was helpful to see that you were muted and thought you were talking. So
sorry about that. One question that I have is, has DHEC considered also doing kind of a parallel revision to the pretreatment regulations that would give us more authority as utilities to address these issues? with our industrial customers. Hopefully, we're going to work cooperatively, and they're going to, reduce their levels voluntarily. But if we needed some more backing on that, is there some consideration for that revision as well?
Angie, right now we have not taken that on yet. This is once again just for informational purposes. It's kind of the way we've looked at this set of it. Crystal, you got some comments?
I was just going to say that's something we're still discussing in the department, but we do feel like we have the existing authority in 122 and other portions of the right to address effluent. But that's still something that's under discussion. The focus of this meeting was land application, and of course ultimately to protect drinking water resources. And so, that's where the focus lies for this.
But we appreciate that comment, and we're definitely having those conversations, Angie.
If you have any suggested language you'd like to see there that the others could look at from the Water Quality Association, that's something we would definitely consider. But I understand your desire to have a little bit more of a regulatory backing for that, and so we can work on that. Consider.
I appreciate that, and I'll talk to Paul about that, and maybe we can get some suggestions to you. Thanks.
Great, thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Angie. And again, I think this is one of the benefits too of we do have a number of different people from Bureau of Water who are in this call and who are part of those pre-treatment discussions as well. So thanks, Sean and Brenda and others who were part of this. Paul?
I just make an observation on the groundwater monitoring. If you require groundwater monitoring, I think the land application of municipal biosolids program is over, and I'm not trying to be scare anybody, but if I'm a farmer, particularly with EPA putting out these interim health advisory levels, which I think are insane, and my understanding is more than half the groundwater data in South Carolina and North Carolina and Virginia has detected PFOA or PFOS, which means it's well above those interim HALs. The answer is no farmer is going to allow any groundwater sampling of their farms, and any regulated product that requires groundwater sampling, they will not accept. I wouldn't if I was a farmer, because their livelihood could be over, because as soon as they sample and there's high data, then they can't land apply these regulated products, and we're back to chemical fertilizer, and God knows what's in that, but there's probably PFAS in that as well. And so they're going to worry that the state is going to impose requirements on them because they have contaminated groundwater. So the better approach, I think, is for the department to characterize the municipal solids. I'm going to leave industrial solids to the industrial people, but characterize the municipal solids and do calculations like we do for nitrogen and phosphorus, agronomic rates, calculate rates that'll be protective of groundwater. But as soon as you require sampling in order to access these regulated products, I firmly believe it's over. They will not accept it. And if they do, and they're found to have PFOA, PFOS, or other PFAS levels in their groundwater above, they may be out of the farming business. And that's not an exaggeration. That's exactly what happened in Maine. So I would urge you to reconsider the groundwater monitoring approach that you're suggesting. And I'm not trying to get out of being regulated. I'm telling you, you can calculate the PFAS the way you do agronomic nutrient rates, which protects the farmer from having to check his groundwater, because there's been a lot of activity on these farms, likely that contain different pollutants, whether it's nitrate or PFAS or something else, and they're just not going to play, is our fear.
So this is Crystal. I just wanted to point out that we were highlighting our existing authority. I think the requirements for monitoring would be decided on a permit-by-permit basis.
And this is Rob. Currently, we're using sites that we consider to be dedicated land application sites, not actually farming fields. If you own your own property and you're putting it down on a routine and regular basis, those are the ones that we've requested groundwater monitoring from the groundwater side. Are there any that I'm missing? Is that pretty close to what
Yeah, I think that's
yeah.
correct.
So if you owned a couple hundred acres of your own property and that's the only place you were putting your sludge down and you were using it on a routine basis, that's when we're requiring groundwater monitoring for the other nutrients and different things that are in there. And I think, so we're not looking at farmers and these places that we're doing this on a one-time every couple of years kind of activity.
I thought you said earlier, Rob, that if for new land application sites you're requiring PFAS characterization and groundwater sampling. So that's not the case as long as we give you PFAS.
No. I said for the sludge, for the waste, we have not had any discussions on groundwater sampling at any facilities for PFAS at this moment. So I apologize if I was not clear, but it was not for groundwater. It was for the sludge before you went to take it to the fields, for new fields.
So we're talking a lot about agriculture. I know we have Wayne Belger on the phone from Belger Farms. We also have Paul Breadwill, who was having a little quirks with his ability to speak, but wanted to check in from kind of the agricultural side. Are there some feedback from y'all and kind of how this would apply, or questions or concerns y'all have?
Sure. This is Wayne Belger. If it's all right to intervene right now, talk. One, I would like to respectfully disagree with Rob on withholding or permits that are in the pipeline now is not curtailing or going to impact our land applications. I am a farmer, and we have to plan out a year at least in advance on our cropping rotation, as well as where we're going to do land applications. So by not allowing us to move forward with the permit modifications that we have in the system now, I think is essentially going to have basically consequences that are not thought out as of yet. I've had a permit modification that's been submitted back since last May, and I still haven't been able to get it moved through or it's not moved through. We also have industries that are coming to South Carolina that need land application as a resource to handle their sludge, and from what I understand, they're not going to be able to go to land application without a sampling of their sludge. And with the sampling method, the way I understand it, and there's been a lot of talk about it today, is still in its infancy stage, and is not set like the rest of the levels that we have to monitor in the sludge that we land apply. So I'm concerned that we're going to have unintended consequences by not allowing what's in the pipeline now to be moved forward. We've been doing land application on our farms for a long time. It's very beneficial. I heard somebody mention fertilizer costs. Fertilizer this year alone has gone up over 200% from what it was a year ago. And at the end of the day, as a farmer, when I look at sludge, I look at N, P, and K, the nutrients that's available to grow our crops with. It's sustainable, it's been around, and it works. And I know there's a lot of moving parts in this, but I ask that the legislators and the regulators that are watching this not to take away a beneficial resource that we have as farmers to produce good crops, and it's our livelihoods as well. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for those comments, Mr. Belzer. And I think these are exactly the conversations that EPA is having with agriculture from a national perspective, because of many of the items that you brought up. So, and I am aware of that's the reason why EPA has made the commitment to fast track some of the things that need to be more certainty and more science behind it. I know that I think it's the NASDA group and ECOS, which I'm a part of, and EPA are going to be getting together sooner than later to talk about these issues. So what we're talking about and the impacts from an agricultural standpoint is a issue across the country. A lot of states are discussing it along with EPA. Radhika Fox in particular, who is over the water program, and I think it's Carlton, Washington, over land and waste management, were in a meeting last week and made it very clear that of all the components of tackling PFAS, this is at the top of the list because of, like you said, recognition that this is part of our waste management strategies that we've relied on for so long and benefits not only, you know, from a landfill perspective, but to the ag industry as a whole. So I think we're bringing it down to the local level, some of these same conversations that other states and even EPA is having right now.
Christy, this is Paul Bredwell. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we got you now, Paul. It's good to hear from you.
I'm sorry for the feedback earlier. I hope I've got this kind of patched in. I'm on a cell phone and I'm on the computer as well. So
hey, we're happy to have you working and able to speak to you.
Thank you, and thank you for having this meeting today. You know, just a couple general questions. You know, I listened very intently with the conversation that revolved around the testing and the testing methods and the fact that these are draft methods and you know, our comment that we submitted tried to focus on that as a national association that supports the poultry and the egg industry. You know, we deal with EPA quite a bit. We're having these same discussions with EPA on a national level. And you know, we would really like to emphasize that yes, these testing methods are in our draft form. We have great concerns over states getting in front of EPA, quite frankly, on this. EPA has pumped the brakes on this, as I think you well noted, because of all these moving parts. And I understand that South Carolina wants to protect their citizens. They want to protect the health of their citizens and the environment. But, you know, we would again just stress that EPA is, I think, trying to pull together a very robust set of data that can guide them in putting out eventual MCLs and goals. You know, these HALs, I think Paul mentioned earlier that these HALs are ridiculously low. We would agree with that. So for those HALs to drive, I think, regulatory issues coming out of the states are again premature. So we would just kind of we'd like to re-emphasize that. As you well know, you have a number of poultry harvest plants within the state of South Carolina. Those plants are big users of water. You know, the water that they utilize to harvest those birds on a daily basis come from either municipal wastewater or water supply plants or groundwater in some cases. So, you know, while that our industry is not generating these materials, there is pass through, and quite frankly, if I heard this conversation stray into potential limitations for water that might be land applied as a final treatment step, that gives us great concern in the fact that it may hamstring that facility to operate in the future.
which obviously would be a detrimental thing for individuals that live in South Carolina and are then able to support their families, of course, and the tax dollars that are generated from those facilities. So these are all very big concerns, and I think it doesn't harm South Carolina to pump the brakes like EPA. So I'd just like to kind of make those comments and just appreciate the fact that you pulled this group together, or you pulled this opportunity together for us to voice these concerns.
Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, thank you, Paul. So one of the things I'm noticing is that we are getting close to 12 o'clock, and we had a pretty ambitious agenda, especially when we thought maybe we could get together in one room for a longer period of time. And then when we kind of adapted to the virtual model, we wanted to be able to have two kind of complementary meetings this week that we could continue this discussion on. So, Crystal, I'm feeling like we're not going to get through the full PowerPoint presentation today, but I do want to note that we've had some really good discussion today, and we're going to have additional conversation on Thursday. And I'm going to go back to kind of swapping out to some of the things we've heard today. Again, I've been trying to take some notes. I know others have, and we do have this recording as a resource for our team as well. But, and the applicability, how are we defining those pollutants? Is it pollutants at a level that triggers requirements? We talked about looking at those definitions of environmental problems. We've talked about the durability of PFAS and the cumulative impact of that, and looking at kind of some of the wording that goes into that. And then as we continue to go on and talk about permit applications and sampling, again, had some really good feedback of, what's going to happen with the data that's collected, how is that shared, what's the methodology, how are we going to address the lab certification needs for this, and kind of the validity of the data. And then let's kind of hit a few other high points here. I'll work with me. I'm doing the PowerPoint. Isn't always friendly to me when I'm jumping slides on the fly. We've also heard a little bit about, what's that guidance to permittees and how to receive data. A lot about the analyte list as well. So we had some very technical discussions, and then we kind of got a little broader, talking about what are some of those impacts to focus on. Is it private wells? Is it the timing? Is it how do we characterize, minimize PFAS, and then regulate it? It's supporting sampling. We heard about some successes in reducing PFAS at the industry level. And then, what's going to happen with permit renewals? Are we going to have research methods or compliance methods? And also, what's that cost-benefit analysis or cost analysis? A few other things I was hearing is, especially with Mr. Belger too, looking at, what are those benefits of land application for farming and for industries that have a need, especially respecting some rising fertilizer costs. Recognizing this is not just a South Carolina discussion, but one in the national level, and how we need to look at kind of what the impacts are. I heard a couple of times too, what are those impacts if we do send things to a landfill, or if we do incineration? What are those other options for waste management, and how do those fit in with what we're doing? So while we were kind of touching on the monitoring and frequency of monitoring, I feel like we still have some discussions to have, not just about the monitoring, but some of the limitations and screening levels, some of the record keeping and reporting, some of the timelines, and just some other general discussion that we can continue on Thursday. I did want to remind everyone that, as Crystal was kind of showing that APA timeline, the Administrative Procedures Act timeline early in this presentation today, that we are still really early in the process. And so we appreciate this opportunity to have these stakeholder discussions and want to make sure we continue on Thursday. But this isn't the only time to have these discussions. So we appreciate everybody being part of this today. Is that kind of a good overview of some of the comments received? Myra, do you or Jennifer or Crystal have some kind of closing thoughts today of what we want to try to focus on as we reconvene on Thursday?
This is Jennifer. I thought it was a great discussion today. I know we didn't get all the way through our presentation, but we do have Thursday, and it's been great conversation, and I think everybody really understands the challenge that we have as industry, as stakeholders, as a state, as looking at it from a national scene. So, I mean, this is what it's all about is, you know, as Myra says, rolling up your sleeves, getting everybody here to the table and talking through what the issues are and how we can collectively address them. So I thought today was a great start to this conversation, the stakeholder process. And Christy, I thought you did a great job of kind of, you know, putting all the main points together right there, and it's a good place we will pick up on Thursday. Myra?
And I'll just add, ditto to Jennifer's comments, and I really want to thank the folks that spoke up today, because I think your comments certainly validated some of the comments we've been having internally, and that's why it's so important for all of you to speak up and give us some feedback, because like I said, we've got to make the best decision from a state perspective. We're not experts in the fields that you are in, and so that's why we heavily rely on your feedback when we think about a regulatory framework, what the implementation challenges and unintended consequences might be. And so I think this has been a good start to the conversation, and there's going to be many, many, many more conversations about this particular narrow focus and other elements of PFAS as we continue to work with EPA and other states across the country. So thanks again, and Christy, I guess we'll follow up, but if some of our stakeholders would like to follow up and maybe suggest some things as far as how we tackle and some of the narrow focus we want to discuss on Thursday, we can do that as well.
And this is Crystal, and I was going to suggest if you have, you know, specific things you want to focus on, please email me. And my email address is rippycd, RIPPYCD @DHEC.sc.gov.
Well, we are right at 12 noon, so I really respect everybody coming together today. We look forward to those continued discussions on Thursday. And thank you again for the good discussion today. It means a lot to us and helps our process. And for those who didn't talk today, we hope to hear from you on Thursday, if not before or after the meetings.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank y'all.
Have a good day. All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.